So good morning to all of you, the participants. First of all, before we begin, I'd like to shout out to the organizers, the Industrial Collaborations Engagement Center of Multimedia University, for organizing this ongoing webinar series on the theme of humanizing innovation. So I'll be your moderator this morning. I'm 𝗂𝗏𝗯𝗍. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Cinematic Arts at MMU. So we have people tuning in from all over. Some might be surprised that we actually have a faculty teaching cinematic arts in Malaysia. One other fact that I'm very proud of is that our faculty was created with the help of the oldest film school in America, University of Southern California. And they have the graduates like the likes of George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars. So if you're one of the audiences tuning in who's interested to study the craft of cinematic arts, I invite you to Google search MMU Faculty of Cinematic Arts and read more about us. Okay, on to this morning's webinar. Our topic for this morning will be local stories, global audience. No matter how advanced our society becomes, we human beings will always have an intrinsic need for stories. We've been telling stories and listening to stories since the beginning of civilization. And now with technology, stories can be easily transmitted to a global audience. So this morning's webinar alone is but one example of that amazing power. So joining us for our discussion, we have two distinguished guests. We have Ms. 𝗟𝗟𝗰𝗋. She's a Vietnamese filmmaker and a storyteller. She tells stories about mothers and daughters, bickering families with humor and realism. She's also been around the world learning her craft of filmmaking, having participated in film learning programs such as Berlinale Talents in Germany, Asian Film Academy in South Korea, Bucheon Fantastic Film School, also in South Korea, and Locarno Summer Academy in Switzerland. Our second guest is our very own Mr. 𝗟𝗂𝗋𝗋. He's also a fellow lecturer at FCA. He's also studied under a great master filmmaker, the world-renowned Hungarian filmmaker, Mr. Béla Tarr. 𝗟𝗂𝗋𝗋 holds a Master of Fine Arts in Filmmaking, and he has made over 55 short films. He's also already written and directed a feature-length film called Temporary Visa, which won Best Film at the Asian Film Festival in Barcelona. So it's time now to hear from our speakers without further ado. I will first hand the mic over to 𝗟𝗟𝗋𝗋. She will share with us her storytelling journey thus far and introduce herself to us using her own words. 𝗟𝗟.
Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you, 𝗂𝗏, for the introduction. I would like to introduce a bit about myself and my film practice. So I am 𝗟𝗟𝗋𝗋. I'm from Vietnam, but I study my film practice in Singapore. So I left Vietnam when I was 18 years old, 12 years ago. And I went to NTU in Singapore and studied filmmaking there for 4 years. So during this time in Singapore, as a film student, I actually made quite a number of short films, but it was with Singapore cast and as Singaporean stories. And the whole time when I was in school in NTU, even though I stayed in Singapore for 4 years, somehow I still felt like an outsider. I couldn't quite capture the local lingo and all the cultural differences between Vietnam and Singapore. It made quite a difficult journey for me when I was in film school. So after I graduated in 2012, I felt like I haven't done enough. And I started working after graduation, but I still have so many stories that I have the ideas for, but I just want to tell them. somehow. So a few years later, I took a leap of faith. I took some savings and went back to Vietnam to make my film. And that was when I made my first ever short film that was done in Vietnam. It's called 𝗟𝗃𝗃. It's a simple story about a mother and a daughter and how they are dealing with the fact that the mother is, the daughter is having a relationship with a married man. So this film called 𝗟𝗃𝗃 that I made in Vietnam. Can I have the next slide, please? As you can see, yes, this is the first film that I made in Vietnam, and it didn't really go anywhere. It was a very naive film, the first film that I made out of film school, but it opens up many doors. So it was the first time that I realized that was what I was missing when I was in film school. I actually should have gone back to Vietnam and tell my stories the way I want it to be in Vietnam, instead of trying to make a film in Singapore where I couldn't really fit in at that point of time. When I went back to Vietnam, I realized there were so many resources and the stories there are much richer than what I expected to be. So the journey of me, the process of me making this film, meeting new people and talking to the actors who are actually they're not professional actors, they're normal people. So I work with non-actors, and the process of me working with them, I realized a lot of things about the world of the middle-aged woman. Is actually a very rich, a very emotional world, and that's what prompted me to make my subsequent films. Yeah, and with this film, it's the film that I sent to many film workshops, and that's why I get into the workshop that I attended in the subsequent years. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I actually submitted this film, and I went to Puchon and Locarno with this film. And also 𝗟𝗃𝗃 is a workshop in Vietnam. And after that, when I went back to Vietnam, after attending on this workshop, I actually made more films, and those subsequent films made me go further into even more workshops, as you can see here. I'm just going to quickly go through them. I'm not going to go into details. So yeah, in the subsequent years, I went to Asian Film Academy. I went to more workshops with more mentorship in the 𝗟𝗃𝗃, and also last year I went to Berlinale Talents before the pandemic hits. Yeah. So then back to my film journey. After the first film and after discovering on these amazing middle-aged women, I wrote a new script and I made a new film. It's called Adults Don't Say Sorry. It's about a middle-aged woman having a Cold War with her husband. And this is a very small family-oriented story. It's inspired by my observation of my mother, actually, and how she always complained about my dad. But whenever my dad is around, she actually treats him so much different. And I believe that a lot of people can connect to it. You know how your nagging moms always complain about many things, but she behaves differently when the person is there. Yeah. So this film is as a start of something too. It didn't really go to big festivals, but it was the start of something. It went to the short film festival in Switzerland, and that's where I met a lot of other amazing filmmakers in the region. That's where I get to watch a lot of really amazing short films. And because I went there, when I went back to Vietnam, again, I was like, yay, I want to make more short films because I get to watch all these really good short films from the region. And that year, there was a focus on Southeast Asian film, and that was a program that I was on. So I met many local, Southeast Asian filmmakers like Amanda from Malaysia. I get to meet other filmmakers in the Philippines, like Carlo or JP. Yeah, a lot of Southeast Asian filmmakers, and I get to talk to them, and that's how I realized that, wow, this community of filmmakers in the Southeast Asian region, we are really closely connected, and we can actually work with each other and help each other in our film journey. And yeah, this is the film that made me realize that. So then, again, after this film, I made another film. It's called Mother-Daughter Dreams. And that film was made during a difficult time when I had to deal emotionally with my mother. Our relationship was going downhill, and there was a lot of struggle that I couldn't express towards my mother. So instead of confronting her, I guess I found a way of talking to her in my film without showing her the film. Until today, she hasn't seen my films. But yes, with this film, I kind of resolved the issue with my mother in my mind. And this is a film about a daughter and a mother in a search for the father who disappeared after a fight with the mother. And it's just a journey of the two women looking for their man. And so this film actually was a big step for me. It was premiered in Busan Film Festival in 2018, and it went to many film festivals after that. And it was screened in Locarno Open Doors in 2019. And why it was so important is thanks to the fact that it was screened in Busan and Locarno. Actually, I got to know much more people, and people are more aware of myself as well as my films, and that's where people start to have an interest in my film practice, and I get much more support for my film journey after that. Yes, so with this film, the year after, actually there was a, how do I say, like this event in Vietnam that was organized by CJ Entertainment from South Korea. So I'm not sure you have this in Malaysia, but in Vietnam and Indonesia, I believe, CJ actually invested a lot of money into the film scene. And one of the events that they organized was this short film competition where you pitch an idea, and if you are selected, they will give you the money to produce the short film. And that's how I got the funding to make my next film, which is called 𝗟𝗂𝗋𝗋. And this 𝗟𝗂𝗋𝗋 film is also based on a personal experience, and where I observed the women in Vietnam who are very pressured about having a son. So if you have a daughter, and you all have daughters, you will feel very, very pressured because you need a son to continue the bloodline. And many women in Vietnam actually try to have an additional son after they have daughters. So you will see many families with very grown-up daughters and a little boy, because they really tried very hard to get that boy. And it's actually something that happens in real life to my acquaintance. So it was an inspiration to make this film about a pregnant woman who is pregnant with a son, and found out that her husband is having an affair, and she was going to beat up the lovers of her husband. And yes, so this film called 𝗟𝗂𝗋𝗋, it also was premiered in Busan, and it also went to quite a number of festivals after that. As you notice, the list of festivals get longer as I went along the way, because I guess there was more recognition, and also the fact that it was premiered at a big festival, and people actually picked up from that. So I've talked a lot, so I'm just going to show you the trailer to my short film 𝗟𝗂𝗋𝗋 before I continue.
Alo, alo.
Con đây.
Mày đang ở đâu rồi đấy? Mấy đứa nó chờ đây từ sáng đến giờ đấy. Mày đừng có mà đi được một mình đi nhá. Tao đã bảo rồi đấy. Hẹn ở đâu thì phải nói đi chứ. Alo, alo.
Rồi, tí con gọi lại.
Hi, welcome back everyone. Sorry for the technical issue. So I'll just continue letting you know about my the continuation of my filmmaking journey. So after the success of 𝗟𝗂𝗋𝗋, the one with the trailer that was shown just now, I continue making a new film. This new film is a special one. is actually 𝗟𝗂𝗋 is supposed to be the last piece of a series about middle-aged women. And I was actually intending to create a new series of short film about on the famous touristic places in Vietnam that I'm very much passionate about, because I do travel around a lot, and as I travel, I see all these stories and all these amusing, funny little pieces of ideas here and there, and I really like to string them together. So this film, A Trip to Heaven, came at a good timing, because I was actually commissioned to make a short film on the phone. And this film was funded as well. And I was just, this idea has been staying with me for a while now. It's about a journey in the Mekong River in Vietnam, because I always go there, bringing my friends and family to the same tour. And for the past 10 years, actually, there's a tour that brings you across the Mekong River, and it's always stayed the same throughout 10 years. It never changed. Nothing changed about the tour. So even if you go to Vietnam now, after the pandemic, of course, and you get on the tour in the Mekong River, it's going to be the same one that I experienced 10 years ago. So this film is inspired by that journey, and also inspired by my own feeling about death, about the journey after death, and actually again about my mother. And I always feel that she has a lot of regrets in her life, and I always wonder, what if she gets to fulfill all these wishes, after she passes away, since she would never actually get to complete them in her lifetime. And it was an inspiration behind this film, A Trip to Heaven. It's about a middle-aged woman going on a tour bus and somehow encounter her high school sweetheart. And they kind of reconnect with each other during the tour. Yeah, so this film was premiered in Locarno Film Festival last year. It won a little prize, and it has been traveling well in Europe and I believe in US as well until now. And it's still going on to other festivals during this year, I believe. And thanks to the digital film festival, it actually has reached a lot more audience than it would have if it only went to physical festival, which is what I feel very happy about. Because I think all filmmakers, when they make a film, we just want as many audience as possible can watch our films. And yeah, I enjoy receiving audience feedback. Even my friends have watched the film and they actually send their feedback back to me and say, hey, I watched your film. This is the first time I get to watch your film, even though you went to many festivals. And I'm like, yay, yes, of course. Yeah, so that was my short film journey. Of course, I also eventually we have to make a feature film at one point. And yes, I'm also developing my own feature project. It is called Don't Cry Butterflies. And it also has its own festival journey. Back in 2019, when my film Mother-Daughter Dreams was screened in Locarno Open Doors, I actually proposed this idea of my feature film to the director of the Mulan Dande residency. She was there to recruit residency candidates for her program, and I actually sent her my proposal, and we had a chat, and I actually won the award. It's actually a 20-day residency in Mulan Dande in France, and I get to write my script there. So last year I actually went for half of the residency for 10 days, right after Berlinale, and then I went back to Singapore just 2 days before Singapore closed the border for people coming back from France. So I was really lucky in that sense. And so later last year, the film also went to a script lab. It's called 𝗟𝗂𝗋 Lab in the Philippines. It's a really good one. If you have a feature project and you want to have some input in the early stage, it's a really good lab to go to. And currently it's being developed with less is more. And I'm hoping to finish writing my script or have a good draft of the script, because we never finished writing our script until the shooting date. Yeah, so I hope to have a good draft of the script this year with less is more, and then the journey will continue next year when I try to get my funding, and hopefully I can shoot my film soon. Yeah, so that's my journey thus far. I would now pass the mic back to 𝗟𝗏 and 𝗟𝗏.
Thanks, Ling. So for those of you tuning in, if you are not familiar with the term feature film, we are talking about a film of perhaps 90 minutes length on average. Okay, I will hand the mic now to 𝗟𝗂𝗋, who will share with us his storytelling filmmaking journey thus far and introduce himself to us with his own words.
Thank you, Khan, and thank you, Lynn, for the presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is 𝗟𝗂𝗋. I am currently serving as a faculty academic staff at the Faculty of Cinematic Arts. Can I have the slides presented, please? I'm gonna share with you guys the journey on how I became a filmmaker, and I will share with you a little approach on how I make films and how I am comfortable, how I work with my actors. So I strongly believe in this. It's a quote by a filmmaker, Dalata, that says that film is not something that you can teach, but film is something like where you create a playground where all our students or all our filmmakers should just be free to do what they want. So I'll share with you a little bit about how I started my journey. Next slide, please. So I started off, I think, with quite a bad result in O levels, which is similar to your SPM. And then I started continuing in a technical school. I started doing IT. And then I had a point where I told myself, this is not what I want to do, and I wanted to do films. So I decided to continue studying. So as you can see, throughout my whole life, I have been studying, and there's a major shift from IT to new media to then filmmaking. And my last film school I went, where I get my master's in fine arts in film directing, was a film school in Bosnia-Herzegovina called Film Factory, which was spearheaded and mentored by Belata. May I have the next slide, please? And throughout my whole filmmaking career, I started off making my first short film in 2004. So technically, this will be, I think, my 16th, 17th year of making films. I'm kind of like a machine in making films. So in total, I have had directed 58 short films of my own, produced 2 feature-length narrative films, and also produced 2 feature-length omnibus films. So just like what what Khan has mentioned, feature length is something in between 70 to 120 minutes. And I have directed my own 1 feature film called 𝗟𝗶𝗵𝗋, which I'll continue in the next slide. And before I move on about 𝗟𝗶𝗵𝗋, I'd like to highlight that there are like how Lynn has a liking of documenting stories of her mother. I have an interest in the mundaneness of life, the everydayness, tension, personal stories, and one thing that I really like a lot is people's stories. And these 4, I'll say like a mantra that helps me continue making films, made me to make my feature film called 𝗟𝗶𝗵𝗋. And 𝗟𝗶𝗵𝗋 was a 123 minutes film that was entirely shot in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I would like to share with you how I actually made this film. So I met these 2 couple, Jakob and Amira, in a coffee shop in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I started talking to them, and I realized that they have an interesting story. A little bit to share about their background. Jakob is a Bosnian, but his family fled Bosnia, and he was born in UK, raised in UK, and studied in UK. Amira is a Bosnian living in Sarajevo. One day after graduation, Jakob decides to do a graduation trip, and he wants to go on a journey to Bosnia, Sarajevo. And that's where he met his lover, Amira, and they have been lovers till today. And I thought that that was a beautiful story. And I straight away went to them and said that, can I do a film together with you? And what got me attracted is that they wanted to do this film because they said that whatever happens to them, this became like a documentation of their life. And I felt that I enjoy, and how I did that was I conducted workshops. So for a period of 1 year, we met every week. And what I did was I want them to highlight to me tensions that they have every day. So I give you an example. One of the tension that Jacob did was he went up the bus without paying for the bus ticket. And there was the police officer or the bus conductor came up, and he was having a lot of tension because he might be fined 100 euros. So just before the bus conductor could reach him, the bus stopped for the next station and he alighted. So those are the kind of tensions that we collected, and there were a lot of tensions, hundreds of tensions collected within this time span of 1 year. And what I did next was I connected all these dots, and I created the script together with them. And that was the birth of temporary visa. Can I move to the next slide, please? And this film also, this very, very small film helped us, and it was awarded the best film in Asian Film Festival in Barcelona. And if it's possible, I would like to show you guys the trailer of this film.
Služba za poslove sa strancima, molim vas, otvorite. Prostite samo trenutak. Tražimo gospodina ovdje koji živi.
Ovdje je živio neko vrijeme i jutros je dobio pismo da ga žele deportovati iz zemlje.
Znaš, ako ne nađemo taj novac, morat ću otići iz Sarajeva.
Što ti ne pitaš svoje roditelje?
Koliko ti treba?
500 maraka. Paci, evo te, meni trebaju pare da ja ostanem u Bosni, a svi bježe odavde.
Pa dobro, do duše, ti imaš razloga, ti imaš Emiru. Pogledaj malo frizuru, dres, Jugoslavija.
Ja.
Šta ti to treba?
Šta fali?
A niđe veze. I kakav je to, molim te, nadimak? Cico.
Ja.
Stidjet?
Tako me svi zovu.
Jebote, Cico.
Jakube! Jakube!
Thank you, and I hope that the video wasn't too laggy. But for those who are interested to see the full version of the trailer, you can just Google temporary visa trailer, and you'll be directed to the link. This whole process of making temporary visa led me to the idea of I love telling people's stories, and there are some sort of my personal story told in Jacob and Amira's story too, because I was totally interested in their life, and I was able to connect, and there is some part of it that I felt it was my story too. And that's when I decided to go back to Singapore, and I wanted to bring this whole idea of how I make films, working with actors, writing the script together as a form of collaboration to my next short films or subsequent films. And this led me to this film called Layang-Layang Terbang Melayang, which was commissioned by Minds, an association for the mentally challenged support in Singapore, and they wanted us to make a film. And I thought that what are the stories that I could actually tell? The best is to tell their stories. Is it possible to have the slides? And this led me to meet these two fantastic actors, which they were part of Minds, and I spent at least a week trying to get to know them. As you can see, Arif on your right is together with his so-called brother, who's actually his teacher. And they were in the same center, but I noticed this kind of brotherhood bonding, which I kind of like. So I brought that persona onto the film, and they were similar to like how Temporary Visa is. I started to craft a story based on their everydayness in the center, everydayness at home, and the tensions are basically something that they face every day. And I learned something interesting from this film, which is, I think the next slide, the picture of a kite. And it's interesting to know that I was having a problem with the commissioner where I had this as an opening for 1 minute. And they were saying that it's a bit too long, but I was fighting for this, and it brought back joy to me when this thing was played in a cinema filled with around 2,000 people, and we have people talking while watching these kites. A lot of the kids were saying that those are the kites, I've experienced playing that kites. And I think that is something that I wanted to bring back, the joy of watching films together and trying to recollect, past memories. And this leads me to the entire film, and I told myself that this whole wonderful approach of telling people's stories should not stop here, and perhaps I should start, trying to tell more stories. But just in case if you would like to watch Layang-Layang Terbang Melayang, there's actually a QR code in the next slide. You can actually scan, and it will direct you to the link in YouTube, or you can also Google Layang-Layang Terbang Melayang, and it will give you the page to that film. And I used the same approach for another film called 𝗟𝗪𝗪. Can I have the next slide, please? And 𝗟𝗪𝗪 is a story about a mother, a lonely mother, preparing a birthday surprise for her busy daughter. And this is an inspiration I get from my own self, where I always, at that period of time when I came back to Singapore, I was busy trying to work, trying to build new networks, and I often forget, my relationship with my family. So I observed my mother, and I started trying to find, characters from the older generation, and I tried to observe their stories, and I think that there's something similar here. So that led me to an open call. We tried to find cast non-professional actors from older generations, and this led me to this lady called Jamila. And with a story that I had, I tried to remodel it and try to have Jamila tell her own story. So basically, she was doing her own actions, her own being herself in front of camera. Again, this piece is a commissioned piece by Creatives at Work and funded by IMDA. Next slide, please. And I enjoy telling the story because what I felt is I had the opportunity I became this person who was telling a little bit of my story. At the same time, I was allowing my actors to tell what they want to tell, and or trying to portray their own natural life. And if you are interested to watch this film, as it's a commissioned piece, you'll see a QR code on the next page, and this will lead you to the film itself. So I would like to end this sharing session with a quote. In conclusion, there are so many local stories waiting to be told. I enjoy being a documenter, documenting history. And I would like to also add in a quote by one of my favorite director, Yasmin Ahmad, which she said, "So I step back as a film director and let people be wonderful. If they are wonderful, take them. If your character don't suit them, change your characters, cause they are God's creation." And with that, I end my sharing session about my filmmaking background.
All right, thank you, 𝗟𝗪𝗪. Okay, if you've just joined us, for the remaining time of this webinar, I will ask questions of our speakers revolving around the topic of local stories, global audience. If you in the audience have a question you'd like to ask either of them, you can type it in the chat box and we'll try and get your questions, and get them to answer your questions, excuse me. Please keep the questions relevant to the topic of local stories, global audience. Okay, I'm excited to ask you guys, but just very briefly, just to take a step back, because I believe many of our audience members are not filmmakers, but they're interested in stories. Why choose film as the medium to tell your stories? Ling? There's so many ways you could tell stories. Why choose film for you?
Well, I actually never really thought about this question. It really came naturally, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy reading books and reading comics and listening to music, and I guess it will be the best of both worlds if we have everything together, which is filmmaking. And I mean, yeah, jokes aside, I guess I just grew up watching a lot of films, especially Hong Kong films, and it
Like
was
in the background there.
Yeah, in Vietnam,
Wow,
when
wow.
in the early 90s, Hong Kong films were very popular. It was screened everywhere. Back then, when people don't have a TV in their household, we actually gather everyone in a group, and then we just share like one black and white TV, and we just watch all these Hong Kong films, like Stephen Chow or those Johnny Woo films, the action films, and it was really exciting time. And I guess it grew in me. Subsequently, it became like Korean TV dramas, is the whole Korean waves in Vietnam. And then the Hollywood films came. I just grew up watching a lot of films. I remember going to, rental store for comic books and rental store for DVDs, as much as each other. We just keep renting things to watch at home. And at one point, I just thought like, oh wow, all these stories. I also have story I want to tell, and I guess that's when I decided as a kid, I applied for film school. Back then, actually, I didn't really think that I would be a filmmaker. I actually thought that I would use, 𝗟𝘂𝗋 knows this. I actually, in my application for the university, I say that, I want to make documentaries and, films that I can save the world, film about like, dying children and poverty and war and stuff like that. I'm actually still interested in that. It's just I haven't gotten a chance to really work on a proper documentary. But that was where I got started, trying to save the world. And now I end up telling family stories. But I guess it reached audience the same way. I mean, it reached people's heart, and that's what I wanted to do in my life. So, yeah.
I believe that our modern audiences, especially the young ones, we're very influenced by Hollywood films, stories told that reach a massive global range, So perhaps 𝗟𝘂𝗋 share with us how important it is to continue telling local stories. You muted.
From a personal perspective, I think it's very important for us to continue document what is happening around us, because I'm scared that things may be, normalized by what we receive from Hollywood. And I think there's a lot of things that are happening within our surrounding and which are good for us to archive, because 100 years down the road, they need evidence, or they need basically an anthropological perspective on how the society lives now. And I think film as a visual image is a very strong tool for you to document all this.
Ling, well, actually both of you, you've spent so much time, extensive time outside of your home country. Just a very simple question, Ling. What is local stories to you? What does it include?
Well, a local story, I guess is a story that comes from our hearts and about what we know the most about, what we know well, and it actually doesn't take any force for it to come out when we tell the story. As for me, when I tell all the stories about all these women back in my country in Vietnam, it's not that I consciously think that I must tell the story about these women. It just naturally comes from inside of me because of how I was brought up, because of the environment that I was living in, and all my observation that built up inside me. And that was how the story just craft itself inside me. So I'm just, bringing on this thing that was inside my life, and I soak up and I just bring it out as a film and present it to the audience. And I guess that is where the local story comes from. It doesn't, let's say, like, oh, you must make a Vietnamese film because you are Vietnamese, but it is because of who I am, I make the kind of film that I make. And yeah, that's my definition.
What about you, 𝗟𝗂𝗍? What is a local story to you?
It's very difficult for me to answer this because I spend a lot of my time overseas, and that's where I start to position myself rather than someone who creates or conceptualizes a story. I document local stories within me. As mentioned earlier, I think that I am attracted to people's stories, and often the stories that I get attracted to are stories that I can relate. And when I relate to the stories, it's something that it has universal theme, and it has something that I've experienced before, which I truly believe in telling stories that the way I know and how I know it. So when you ask me about local stories, I think that they are stories that is happening around me wherever I am, whether it's in Malaysia, Singapore, or even in a country in Europe.
Yeah, that's a very good point, especially, again, the both of you have spent so much time overseas and even living outside of your home country. Either of you can jump in on this. Does that actually help you or confuse your sense of identity when it comes to storytelling, being a citizen of the world?
For me, I think it helped me take a look at stories from a thematic approach, and it helped me to make it more universal. It allows me to see a mother, let's say in Belgrade, in Eastern Europe, or maybe a state where nobody actually knows much about it, is as similar as a mother in Malaysia. So that's where I try to find how these characters can connect and show or portray this in films for a global audience, for a bigger, wider range audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we talk, go ahead, Ling.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to add on to 𝗟𝗂𝗍. I agree, because we keep thinking, oh, this story only happened in Vietnam. But to be honest, when I show my films to audience in Europe, or when I tell my idea of my film, and I just keep telling them, oh, I'm worried that this is just a small family story of this mother and a daughter in Vietnam, and nobody would care about. But I realized that, this kind of story, it happens everywhere in the world. The mother and the daughter relationship is the same in Vietnam. It's the same in Europe. It's the same in the US. We also struggle with the same thing. Like a topic I like to talk about is a marital affair. It's also happened everywhere. There are people cheating on each other. Any part of the world, and there are people going through the same kind of emotion anywhere in the world. And so when they watch a film about this mother and a daughter in Vietnam, they can actually relate, because it's a universal thematic. It's a story that makes us human, and we can actually just tell our story as it is. And I believe that audience anywhere can connect to them. So in that sense, I don't really feel the sense of losing identity. I actually feel that it gets stronger, because at the same time I can tell my story of where I come from, but at the same time, people anywhere in the world can connect to them.
Yeah, that's very true. I've heard this saying that to make your stories universal, make it local. The more specific and local you are in your story, the more you have a global identification. 𝗟𝗂𝗋, have you had experience like that before during your film screenings and afterwards the Q&A where people tell you that they can relate to what you've done?
Yes, and I think I've learned this through in a very painful way through making films. Perhaps in the early days, I tried making films without going to a film school, without anybody trying to tell me, like, what is good and how to tell a story. So I just went in with this idea of like, I'm gonna make the next big Hollywood film. That's where I start to realize like people don't get connected. Perhaps they are more connected to emotions. And that's where I start thinking about like, what do people want to see? What do people want to see in Singapore? Do I share stories about the local people? And that's where my journey starts to begin with this idea of like, making films, telling people that, this community in this part of the world exists. And sooner after audience start to get, connected with these characters, even without meeting them. Like for example, I have people adding, after making, or every time after showing Temporary Visa in a film festival, Jacob and Amira will message me privately and say, did you show the film somewhere? Because people start adding me on Facebook. So people want to be their friends and they want to be acquainted, and their love in that film translate in that film and get connected to the audience.
Okay. When we talk about global audience, we have to talk about the current trends, right? More and more people are spending their time virtually, watching the videos online, YouTube. How has that affected local storytelling, you think? Or how has that affected storytelling, you think? Ling?
So far, it hasn't affected me much. I still write my story the way I write, and I still make them the way I make them. I guess it's just how we have to be, as filmmaker, we have to be more creative of creating our films with all the restriction that we cannot travel so far. I've known friends who actually made films through Zoom. So, they Zoom each other, and then the actor actually plays the camera, and then the DP actually, the director of photography actually see the angle, and the actor actually film and act themselves in front of the camera via Zoom. So in the sense, I feel that with the digitalization of everything, the filmmakers need to be more smart in that sense. In terms of watching films online, I found myself, spending much more time on Netflix and movie and on the apps to watch films. And actually, it's a good thing because I actually spend more time watching films than, compared to many years ago. Because we spend so much time at home and we have all these apps just at our fingertips, and we can just turn them on and choose a film that fits our mood, and we just access them anytime, anywhere, which I think is a good thing, and for the audience as well, because they now have they can approach many films of a different taste than just the usual Hollywood or Korean that are being offered in the cinema. And I think it's a good thing.
𝗟𝗂𝗋, anything to add to that? Because we're not just storytellers, we are also an audience, right? Have you found your viewing habits changed with the small devices and the YouTube and stuff like that?
I still try not to take a look at spend my time in my phone a lot. I rather like open my balcony and like try to see what's happening around me. But what I like to add on to what Lin says is that I noticed a certain pattern and the flow of filmmaking here. When digital appears perhaps in 1980s, when I mean digital, I mean digital cameras. Filmmaking was very expensive before, And digital camera revolutionized making people able to make films way cheaper than how it was made before. And then with this current state, I think it revolutionized not the process of making film, but the audienceship, the viewership. Because right now, previously, people will have, if you want to watch a film, you have to go through a physical space like a cinema. And that's very difficult for you to connect with the director. But with the idea of a lot of online meetings, with the idea that small stories, local stories that may often be forgotten, are very easily reachable within the internet, within their fingertips. I think that local films like this get reach across, transnational within every countries, and I think that is very interesting because I'm getting a lot of message right after 𝗏𝗏 was premiered online on YouTube instead of a festival. I get messages from people from all over the world who have watched that film, and they are not filmmakers. Usually, people from the filmmaking scene will message me. Now I'm getting audience who may not be, their film literacy may not be high, but they are messaging me because they say that, oh, it reminds me of my mother, this documentation of an old woman. So I think that it's evolving how this whole process of viewing, and I think it's revolutionizing how audience view things. It gets a global audience a wider reach.
All right, if you've just joined us, we're on a webinar series, and we're talking about local stories, global audience. I've got some feedback that it's a little bit laggy. I think it's partly because we're calling in from different countries, and perhaps the weather is a little bit stormy today. So as you can see, there's some limitations of the technology still. I think the infrastructure is already here, but it's going to take another 5 to 10 years to perfect it. But on that note, stories, global audience, we have to talk about social media. Social media is now able to transmit local stories on a global scale for just about anyone. You don't need to be a celebrity, you don't need to be a newscaster. And of course, the downside to that, as we can see in America and some parts of the world, is misinformation can spread so easily. Do you think that a storyteller has a sense of responsibility to the truth? Ling, what do you think about that? Comments?
You mean like when you say social media and misleading?
Yeah. So far, the both of you have talked about stories from a very personal and neutral point of view, right? And stories can encompass, news reports. It can encompass verbal storytelling, vlogs, and stuff like that. And we can see the effects of stories going out that are used for propaganda. They are used for spread misinformation and lies, and the negative effects of that. We've seen the positive and negative effects of storytelling being able to spread so far and easily. Do you think there's a responsibility for yourself, or do you feel a sense of responsibility for yourself as a storyteller?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak for everyone. But I guess when you come to the internet, there's always space for misleading information. It's, the fake news and all the wrong information has been there since the beginning of the internet. It's always been spreading. For me, in my personal filmmaking journey, I just like to tell the story as it is, based on my daily observation of things. And of course, and it's partly why I find it hard to start looking on documentary series until now. It's really, really hard to find that balance, not to fall into the, like you said, propaganda route, or to inject our own ideas into certain facts. And yeah, that's why I've been staying with narrative until now, so that I can tell a real story through my my way of telling narrative film without so much pressure of this misleading information and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. 𝗟𝗚𝗃, what do you think?
𝗟𝗚𝗃, you're muted.
Sorry, my students always say that you are muted. I think it's a very interesting topic because as much as we filmmakers want a global audience, want our film to reach outside, it's also eating us up the responsibility, because every single information, and especially with this idea of you can just take the camera, anybody can take the camera and just point it to something and you can upload it. And this gives you a lot of space for misinformation. That's why I always believe that I need to tell stories of what I know with what I have. And I keep this as my mantra. And in fact, to put on one step ahead, because before I can make a narrative film, because narrative film is a film that we construct, like a short film, a feature film, I will usually identify the theme, like for instance, mother and daughter. But before making that, understanding this whole idea of this story, I'll make a small documentary. Perhaps I'll try to find an older woman or a busy daughter, and I'll try to document their life. So because filmmaking itself is a construction. So if you're saying that I am trying to make as close to truth, it's very difficult to say that, because the idea of editing itself is trying to put your point of view and your stories. So I try to eliminate as much misleading information by trying to understand. And through that, I only tell what I understand. And I hope that my audience will also go through this journey of understanding the story or emotion with me.
Okay, we have some comments from some of our viewers. Juan Fu said that the audio is good enough. Thank you, Juan. The topic is extremely important for film workers and film students to understand. Thank you for that encouragement. From Kenzo Takahashi, it's very nice to hear MMU's activities overcoming difficulties in the pandemic environment as well. With, well, I added with love, from Tokyo. We have a question from an audience member, Megan. She asked, what is the current film project that you are working on? Maybe you can highlight it again, Ling. Yeah,
so as I mentioned, I actually have a feature film project that I'm working on in the development stage. Right now I'm at the treatment stage, and we are actually going to have a session with our mentor from 𝗟𝗟𝗰𝗋 end of this week. When after that, I will start the next stage of my writing, and hopefully end of this year I can come up with a script for that feature film project. And at the same time, I'm also having this short film series that came to a halt due to the pandemic about the touristic destinations in Vietnam, and hopefully I can resume this journey with this series soon, hopefully this year or next year. That's for me.
𝗟𝗍.
I've always been doing relationship of two people. So in 𝗟𝗪𝗻, it's about mother and daughter. In 𝗟𝗶𝗵, it's about two lovers. Suddenly I'm interested in the relationship of a son and a father. So I am trying to write something out and trying to observe more fathers around, but that doesn't stop me. And I think that I'm also trying to document my life. Right now I'm doing a project. It's called the Poetics of Movement. So I'm trying to challenge, things are happening so fast right now. And we have a social media platform called TikTok. And every night I will just, scroll and see contents. But I told myself, like, let me try to slow down my life. So I want to challenge the fastest video content sharing app with the slowest video. So I created this whole profile called the Poetics of Movement that you might want to follow. It's just documenting me doing daily stuff, looking at the balcony, watching TV, and I hope that people enjoy it.
𝗟𝗂𝗋 is going to challenge himself with the speed of TikTok, and he's going to try out a father figure. Ling, do you have something new that you're going to try out, you're interested to explore in this next project?
This next project, okay. Well, I have never actually made. Okay, I tried before, but it failed. A man and woman relationship film. As you notice, actually, I've always been making films about family relationship. But I felt that man and woman relationship is a territory that I would love to venture into, but I haven't had a chance to. I tried before. It's just really naive and ridiculous. So now that I'm 10 years older than when I was in my first attempt, I'm gonna attempt it again in my next film for the touristic series. Yeah, I actually have ideas and stringing them together, and hopefully I can, write something down soon.
Okay. We've got a few comments from the audience, encouragements from Zen Tang, saying that the films shown are nice. And from Mary Grace Liu, thank you for doing this webinar series. Keep doing it. It helps me gain different perspectives from your point of view. Okay, again, when I think about global audience and we're talking about filmmaking, I can't help but think about Hollywood. And some of you have already addressed these, either of you have already addressed these points, but Hollywood films have this global reach, right? There's this global impact on storytelling that resonates. How does a local storyteller compete with that? 𝗟𝗂𝗋, comments about that?
This is something that I'm trying to formulate, and I think that global audience is perhaps a solution for us to keep making films. It's very difficult for us to put side by side with Hollywood because ultimately we are talking about budgets. But when we talk about budgets, filmmaking itself is a business. It's like, money put in, money get back. And the sales of tickets, when you talk about, like, for example, Singapore or Malaysia, our audience are still very little in compared to many other countries like India, where they make one film and they can get their money returns because our population is very, very low. So the only solution for me right now, I think, that's happening with a lot of Southeast Asia filmmakers are co-productions. Co-production meaning that, you split the budget, like perhaps it's a bit of budget coming from Singapore, a bit of budget coming from Europe, a bit of budget coming from Vietnam. So it became a Singapore, Vietnam, perhaps, UK production. And through this, you are already capitalizing on 3 different country viewership. So it's increasing the audience viewership, and that's the only way to sustain because Southeast Asia market is very, very small. And I hope that, I think through this whole idea of transnational cinema, we can continue telling local stories. And the kind of stories that are being told, you have to tell stories that is, from the example I told you, something that Vietnamese can relate, Singaporeans can relate, and also UK people can relate, because these are the 3 countries that are collaborating. So universal themes, universal characters, things that people can relate are very important for such stories and collaborations.
That's a great point. No matter how good the films are in America, and they are very well made, we need Vietnamese films, right? We need films in Malay. Ling, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that we can't compete with Hollywood film. Actually, we can. Surprisingly, what happened in Vietnam actually earlier this year? So because of the pandemic, a lot of Hollywood films are halting their premiere across the world. And so in Vietnam, actually, we actually had thirst for content. And so when we go to the cinema, and there's no Hollywood film, they actually start watching local films. And surprisingly, records have been broken this year in Vietnam alone. first film after film after film, local Vietnamese films shown in the cinema, and it's broke the record of all-time box office records. It's really the latest one that broke the box office record. It's just a family story again, a local family story created for local audience, and it gathered a lot of money. And it's not that we can't compete with Hollywood. I guess it's just that we need the rights, the right timing, and now is a good chance actually to produce more local content. And I noticed also a trend in Netflix, for example. They have recently bought a lot of local films, local Vietnamese films, old Vietnamese films are being bought and screened on Netflix, and local audience actually started watching them from what I observed. Singapore as well, similarly, they just bought a whole retrospective of all Singaporean films, and the local audience actually watched them. So it's not that our local content can't compete with Hollywood. We just need to be brave and create more content. And like 𝗟𝗚cie said, co-production is very important to jumpstart on this project, because I understand that when it comes to commercial film project, there's a business side involved. So it's always about profit, whether you're making profit. But even to the Vietnamese investors, they actually get a surprise this year, because all the local films won so much money, and I guess it's like a wake-up call for everyone. Like we have so much materials, so much more materials than Hollywood. I feel that because of the generalization of everything, there's only so much story Hollywood can tell. But that's why they are reaching out to Southeast Asian audience. Even the latest Disney animation is about a Southeast Asian girl,
Raya and her dragon. Yeah.
I haven't watched it, but apparently my friends say they're very happy with it. Yeah, so that's what I mean. They are reaching out to us. That's why we are here. We have all this material. We know our audience the best, and we know our story the best. Why don't we just make more films and build our own empire? Yeah.
What a powerful way to end. Yeah, I can feel the strength and slight rebellion in your voices, because I'm sure, 𝗟𝗚cie, you've had this experience where students come in, even myself when I was a young storyteller. You love the West, you grew up on Hollywood films, and it's definitely superior to us in our minds. And then as they begin to realize the need for representation, and as Ling has mentioned, when we see the representation, we realize, wait a minute, it doesn't always have to be this particular language or this particular culture, right? You have that experience, 𝗟𝗚cie?
If you don't mind me trying to elaborate a little bit more, because I think that it relates to your question about the responsibility of the director. And I totally agree to you that, when students come in, just like me, I cannot exclude myself out. I came in when in my early days of film school. I want to be the next Hollywood filmmaker. I want to tell big stories. And then, your lecturers will be showing you films from Iran, 𝗟𝗶 𝗶, and you'll be like, no, too sanitized from what you have watched from Hollywood. Like, that's how film is. And you will say that 𝗟𝗶 𝗶 films are boring, perhaps very slow. But you don't realize, a lot of students do not realize that 𝗟𝗶 𝗶 films are actually mainstream in Iran. And a lot of filmmakers that we think are art house are mainstream in their own countries too. So what I think, to add on to what Lin have mentioned, I think this is a very good opportunity for us to increase our film literacy. Because like what happened in Vietnam, there was a thirst for content. And I felt that it's where filmmakers can combine joint effort together to push the film literacy, telling local contents and getting people to appreciate that, rather than, I guess, I do not want to use this word, but I'll say it, like to desanitize our, audience viewing culture, and hopefully that they can come back after the pandemic when cinemas are open, coming with families, getting enjoyed by local stories. And that's one of the way that our cinema can go back, local cinema.
Actually, Ling, have you had that experience of seeing representation that changed your perspective about storytelling? Like seeing your race represented, your ethnic group, your language?
You mean in Hollywood films?
Perhaps when you were young and you saw a local film.
Well, I don't know, like when I was watching Hollywood film when I was young, I didn't really think much about it, but recently when I rewatched a lot of old Hollywood films and they have like Chinese characters, I actually felt a bit offended. The way that it was represented, or even like, you know, the latest one, Mulan, I think it would be much better if they just speak in Chinese instead of, you know, everyone trying to speak English. But I guess that's just my personal opinion. I felt that it could be much better represented, and this is gonna, you know, start an entire webinar session just for this topic. So I'm not gonna delve too much into that. Yeah, I guess what we can do our best is, as filmmakers, is just, you know, bring better stories, better local stories, and you know, I always believe that if it is a story that was told from the heart, if it is a story that, you know, we truly believe in, there will be an audience for it. Yeah, and we need to think about competing with Hollywood because, you know, our own audience will always connect to our stories. We will always have their heart as long as we are telling a story from our own heart. Yeah.
That's a very, very encouraging note to end. I would like to say hi to Nizam. He says, long time no see. We've got another comment from Juan, who says, filmmaking is the modern storytelling. Make your own stories, your ideology, your culture to the world. But if you don't make your own, others will make it and it will become theirs. What a great note to end. I have a final story to wrap this up. When I was in Sentosa in Singapore, it's a tourist spot, and I was at the snack shop area, and this Swedish lady turned around to me and said, hey, she handed me 𝗟𝗏𝗋𝗋. You'll know 𝗟𝗏𝗋𝗋. It's the ice dessert that's famous in Singapore and Malaysia. And she said, I only took one bite and I don't like it. Do you want this? I don't want to waste it. And I always remember that in conjunction with local stories, with filmmaking, which is that we won't appeal to everyone in the global audience. Some people grew up with a completely different set of ideology and taste, but that's not our job either. Our job is just to, as you both have very eloquently mentioned, our job is just to tell our own stories, and the audience that relate to it will find their way to our films. So I'm going to wrap up today's session right now. If you have asked a question and we haven't had time to address it, please type in the chat box. We'll forward the question to the speakers who will respond in the chat box on Facebook. Once again, a very special thanks to our guests this morning, 𝗟𝗍 and Ling. And on behalf of the organizers, please continue to check our continuing webinar series, Humanizing Innovation, by following our MMU Facebook page. Thank you very much, guys. Have a pleasant day.